How many people out there right now feel like they are wasting their time, but actually they're putting in lots of time and effort into whatever they're doing, but they still feel like they're lacking? Well, I'm one of them. Even though I'm using my time actually pretty damn well, it still feels like I'm not, and I have to question why that's the case. What kind of beliefs or systems or thoughts are in place would drive such a strong reaction to something that's not even really happening? I think, first of all, in modern years, our expectations of ourselves might have shot up because we are comparing ourselves more to other people. We are aware of the more extreme ends of people's talent and abilities. That paired with perhaps getting older and feeling more of a responsibility to be productive kind of all comes together and creates a framework from which we start thinking that we're not using our time well enough, when in reality we might be using our time better than we've ever been spending it in our entire lives. So if that's the case, then it seems that we need to define what using our time well looks like in a way that's better and more realistic and intentional. Because right now our framework seems to be something a little bit more impulsive and not properly thought out. And I think when our mind is being quite extreme in this way and being hasty, it's doing it out of fear. For me personally, I think about what fears could be driving this, and I think a fear of regret is one of the biggest drivers. It's funny, fear of regret is the most out of the present moment that you could possibly be, because you're fearing something, which means you're thinking about if something could happen in the future, and that thing that you're worried about in the future is the fact that you can be thinking back to something you were doing in the past. It's pretty crazy, really. So I've definitely had a few moments where I've felt the pain of regret for different reasons, and I think my brain is just trying to protect me from that, because I learned that it was a very unpleasant thing, and it adds these protection mechanisms on top of it. But your fears might be completely different, but it's just worth taking kind of an audit as to why you specifically are feeling like your mind is being so intense about this. So yes, absolutely, there is a spectrum to this. You might be feeling just like a little bit of a kick to use your time better, or you might be feeling like somebody's got a gun to the back of your head, which, as I said, I think is a protection mechanism, and it comes from fears of replicating things that have happened in the past. So what do we have to do about this? The first thing we have to recognize is how much we actually are putting in. We actually have to recognize almost objectively how much we are doing and how much we are putting our time to use, because the mind seems to overfixate on all the reasons why you're not doing enough. And it's like no focus is given to everything that you are doing. Because it's the moments that we're not taking into account how much we actually are doing and are just focusing on what we're not doing, that these kind of thoughts have the most power and most push and bring forth the most emotional reactions. But there's another issue that we have to address here, because our definition of what it means to work well and productive might have shifted over time, shifted into territory that's not actually fair on us, and is the result of being used to seeing such amazing people doing amazing things all the time. And if that's the case, then we have to realize that and change our definition of what it means to use our time well back to something that's more realistic. And what that looks like in practice is that every time you're kind of finding yourself reaffirming that what you're doing is not enough, you could question it and say, well, the current benchmark that I'm measuring myself against is one that's simply unrealistic. Because we beat ourselves up the most when we blindly believe that we truly aren't doing enough and we don't question it any further. A lot of this kind of work literally is just questioning the frameworks that the mind is built upon, because it's often hasty and it's very assertive and it's very dominant, but it does this under false pretenses. It thinks it's doing the right thing for you. It always does, but it often overcorrects itself in order to protect you from things that have happened in the past. So that's what I was talking about before, where that fear comes from. So to know if we are using our time well, we have to do an internal audit and see where we're currently at. Are we making this judgment from an unfair place? And one thing that helps me is I compare myself to a time a few years ago when I wasn't dealing with this. And I would ask if I thought I'd be using my time well then. And if so, then you would have to ask what's changed in that time. And as I said, what's likely changed is you've just started expecting more and more over time of yourself. You think you need to meet the world's artificial quota that they are giving to you via the content that you're seeing. You didn't even necessarily think that consciously. It was just something that was... It was a perception that was built over time. It's like you're making assumptions about how the world really is based on what you're seeing. And that's why the modern world is so difficult. So in actuality, we are doing more than enough. We're actually doing great. But our internal bearings are off. And that's not any fault of our own. It just seems that the modern world around us has pushed us into that direction. And it's not fair because now we have to use our time recalibrating ourselves back to what's realistic. So part of the solution is redefining this for ourselves and not letting the world define it for us. Because actually, what time well used looks like is different from person to person. There's no one correct answer. Some people spend their entire day just trying to survive and there's nothing else they could have done. And in that case, well, that's them spending time as well as they possibly can. And to be honest, I think it's kind of difficult to even define what time well spent looks like. Because there's so many different things that we could be doing in a day. How do we narrow it down to some simple bullet points? So right now, I'm trying to redefine what time well spent looks like because I have veered away a bit from the corporate path, the 9-to-5 stuff. I haven't been working in that sector for a couple of years. And almost that entire time, it's like something felt off, like I should be working on that. And that's the other thing. It's like society feels like it pulls you into a certain direction to work in a certain role, especially when you've spent all this time and money getting to the place where you can be qualified for that job. Something just feels off when you start not working on it. You suddenly might start to think that you're not spending your time well when you're not working towards that. But again, if there's any right you should have, it should be that you should be the one that's able to define what time well spent looks like for yourself and no one else. Because you know where your values are, you know where your strengths lie, you know what you want to do, you know where your motivation is. So it's quite difficult for other people to define that for you. Because when it comes to your work especially, you're always going to be doing the best in something that aligns to your values and your joys. So for me, because I'm still in the midst of feeling like I'm not doing enough, even though I am, one of my goals is going to have to be reaffirming what time well spent looks like and the reasons why I am spending my time well. It's almost like creating a new belief. And that's why this stuff can take some time, months, maybe half a year. But it's like an out with the old and in with the new type of thing. I don't want to have to keep feeling like I'm wasting time, even though I'm not. It's just silly. And each time I'm met with one of those thoughts, I can meet it with the fact that I am doing enough. Over time, I believe this issue will fade because the belief system just needs evidence that that's the case. And if you keep giving it that evidence, then surely it has to relax and go, okay, everything is fine. Because that's what this is about. It's like, is everything fine? Is everything fine? Is it not? That's what the brain's doing. And it's your job to show that it is fine. And I suppose there's many ways you could do that. You could even talk about self-soothing techniques and breathing and slowing things down. And that's more of how to deal with this emotionally rather than mentally. Because especially if this kind of thing is really getting to you emotionally, self-soothing techniques actually become quite important as well. And there's plenty of those online that you can learn. But what really helps me is just coming back to the facts and reinforcing that over and over and over. Because the mind isn't operating from a factual place and it's almost like it needs to be taught to do so. So don't take those thoughts too seriously. Recognize where they came from and you'll probably find that it was more of a false alarm rather than something that requires the immediate attention that it seems to want.